Hi guys, and welcome to Total Technik. Today's video we're doing a buyer's guide. This is for the Audi S4, both the B6 and the B7 models. Let's do it. Okay, so first things first, why are we covering both the B6 and the B7 models all in the same video? The reason for that is effectively they're an identical car. The B7 that we have here at the front is essentially a facelifted version of the B6. So the original B6 S4 was released in 2003. That was later replaced with the facelifted B7 in late 2005, and this model ran through to 2008. And both models were available in saloon, Avant and Cabriolet versions. So both of these models share the vast majority of components. They've got the same engine, they've got the same suspension, they've got the same brakes, they've got the same gearboxes. They're basically exactly the same car. There are a few minor differences, but the vast majority of those are purely cosmetic. And to give you an example of some of the cosmetic changes between the B6 and the B7 models, for example, the B6 has a split grille, it has an upper and lower grille, whereas on the B7 model they replaced that with a large single grille. The B6 has very kind of square shaped headlights, whereas they replaced that on the B7, this kind of a slightly sculpted look. And obviously things like the front and rear bumpers are different, but you know, those changes are purely cosmetic. So some of the cosmetic changes are carried on inside the vehicle with things such as the steering wheel, but things like seats and most of the major internal components again remained exactly the same for the B7 model. There were a few technical changes between the B6 and the B7 models, but they were very small, things like going from a single stage airbag on the B6 to a dual stage airbag on the B7. Also the B7 has a slightly improved CAN bus system, but for most people in everyday life that's going to make no difference to them whatsoever. But the main point between these two cars is that they both share the vast majority of components and they're both exactly the same to drive. So that's why we're covering both in this video. And what we're trying to do in this video is to not produce a generic buyer's guide. If you go online and do some searches, you can still find the original buyer's guides for when these cars were originally released. But what we want to do is get down to a little bit of the nitty-gritty of what it's actually like to own these cars on a day-to-day ongoing basis. So we're going to cover some of the quirks and some of the things that you may not have considered when you're looking to buy one of these cars. So the first major point that we need to mention when it comes to the B6 and the B7 Audi S4 is somewhat of the elephant in the room, if you like, and that is these cars do have an inherent design issue, and that is their cam chain system. Now the fact that the Audi S4 utilises a cam chain system rather than a cam belt isn't a problem in itself at all. There are lots of makes and models that use cam chains. But when it comes to the S4, Audi, in all of their wisdom, decided to arrange the cam chains at the rear of the engine instead of at the front. More commonly, the cam chain arrangement is at the front of the engine, so if you have to do any service work to those cam chains, yes, it's a bit of a pain. You know, obviously the bumper's got to be removed, the slam pan on the radiators have all got to be stripped out so you can gain access to the front of the engine. It is quite a large job, but it is doable. But on the Audi S4, where they're located at the back of the engine, there's no way to actually access those chains with that engine still in the car. So to do this work, the engine actually has to be physically removed from the car, which makes it a very expensive job. Now on the S4 with the cam chains, it's not generally the actual cam chains themselves that cause the issue. It's actually the cam chain followers, and what those are is a series of plastic guides around the engine around which the cam chains rotate. And what tends to happen over time with those cam chains permanently going around those followers start to get a little bit of wear on their surface, and that can lead to a slackness in the cam chain, which in turn will lead to the cam chain rattling. Now before I go any further, when it comes to the subject of cam chain rattle on the S4, there's one very important distinction to make, and that is that the Audi S4 also has a kind of a second inherent fault, if you like, and that is when you first start the car from cold. Now what will happen when you cold start an Audi S4 is you jump in the morning, you fire it up, and you will hear a cam chain rattle that should last no longer than 1 to 2 seconds. Now that initial cam chain rattle from a cold start is considered normal by Audi and is generally considered one of the normal quirks of these cars. In fact, you'll be hard pushed to find an Audi S4 these days that doesn't have that initial light rattle upon first startup, and there's a very good reason for that. Now there is a technical reason why you get that initial rattle, and that is because the cam chain tensioners, which obviously tension the chain itself, they're operated under oil pressure. So if you put your key in and fire the car straight up, there's not enough pressure inside the engine, and it takes 1 or 2 seconds to build up a little bit of pressure and get those cam chains taut. And that is the reason why you get that initial 1 to 2 second rattle, which then disperses. So it's very, very important to distinguish the difference between having a permanent cam chain rattle and the cam chain rattle upon cold startup. The cold startup is considered absolutely normal. That's nothing to worry about. You'll be lucky to find an S4 of this kind of age that doesn't have that initial cold start rattle. However, if it has a permanent rattle, that's a completely different story. Now if you do have a permanent rattle inside the engine on the S4, that means that it's highly likely that there's wear to the cam chain followers, and so unfortunately the engine has to be removed to actually do that work. And this is exactly the situation that many owners find themselves in. They'll hear that initial rattle from their engine when the engine's running normally, and they'll go and get a quote from their garage, and they'll be quoted quite a lot of money to do that job, and so they'll think, oh, I'll just leave it. And so that rattle will get progressively worse and worse and worse. And what will happen if you leave that rattle for long enough, then unfortunately eventually those cam chains will fail, and that can result in the death of the engine, which is why many of these S4s unfortunately are finding their way to the scrap heap because they're not being maintained properly. Now if you find yourself in the position where you do have a permanent cam chain rattle in your Audi S4, the only real permanent fix is to have that engine removed, have the cam chain work done, have the engine fitted back into the car properly, and you're going to be easily looking at a bill in excess of £2,000, around $2,500. So it is quite a considerable amount of money that's involved to do this job properly. A couple of quick questions that were asked quite a lot when it comes to the cam chains on the Audi S4s. Firstly, does it affect all S4s? Now the answer to that question is unfortunately yes. Due to the design of the Audi S4 cam chain system, eventually it's going to need a replacement or some work done on it. It's just really a matter of time. Another common question that people ask is, does the mileage affect the cam chain rattle? If they're looking to buy one, should I only buy as low a mileage one as I can? Is the mileage going to be the factor, the do-all and end-all factor of whether the cam chain is going to present me with any problems? The answer to that question is no, the mileage is not the overriding factor. Unfortunately, it's not a case where you can say, well, as soon as these cars hit 100,000 miles, that you're going to start getting your cam chain issues. It doesn't work that way. You can start having these cam chain issues from 50, 60,000 miles from new, and likewise, I've seen cars that have got 130, 140,000 miles that don't have this issue. Like I mentioned before, sooner or later you will unfortunately experience this issue, and you will have to do some cam chain work, but it's not directly related to the mileage. There are other factors that can be considered really when it comes to these engines far more important. So unfortunately that is the inherent quirk of the Audi S4, this cam chain system, which is a bit of a design error in retrospect by Audi, but it's one of those things, if you're going to buy one of these cars and you intend to keep it for any period of time, you have to accept that as an inherent design flaw, as one of the quirks of owning one of these cars. Yes, it will have to be done eventually, but if you look at it from the other side of the argument, you say, okay, well, if it had a cam belt, I would have had to have replaced the cam belt 2 or 3 times for every one cam chain change, and so the price between the two over a long period of time might not be considered dramatically excessive, but that's something you do have to consider, which is why it's one of the major points that we want to cover on this video. You need to know about this cam chain and you have to be prepared for it. As long as you're happy with that, the S4 is a terrific buy. So is there anything you can do to counteract the cam chain issues, or anything you can do that will prolong the life of those cam chains? Yes, there are. There are 3 main things you should look at doing if you're going to own one of these cars to help prolong the life of that cam chain system. So first and foremost, you always want to use the correct oil for the Audi S4. We're actually producing a video on what the correct oil for these cars is. I'll have a link for you below, so check that out if you need to. But that's one of the most important things you can do to prolong the life of your cam chains, is to always ensure that you're using the correct oil. Secondly, you want to ensure that you're doing regular oil changes on your Audi S4. Here in the UK, the Audi S4 was released on the long life service schedule, which means that the car needs servicing every 20,000 miles or every 2 years. But due to the cam change system that's in this car, that is certainly far too long. Even if you're only getting your car serviced every 2 years or every 20,000 miles, that's fine if that's what you wish to do. However, the oil would absolutely need to be changed every 10,000 miles, especially as these cars start to get a little bit older. And some people, Audi enthusiasts out there, will even argue that the oil on these should be changed every kind of 3,000 to 5,000 miles, which is perhaps a little bit extreme. But the more often you change that oil, the better it's going to be for the cam change system, especially the cam chain followers, which rely on that lubrication to stop them wearing. And the third thing that we're going to cover on this video for prolonging the life of your cam chains is to always ensure you use the 15-second rule. If you don't know what the 15-second rule is, again, we're going to produce a video on that, so I'll add a link for you below. That's a really nice, simple tip that will help prolong the life of your engine. So always be sure to use the 15-second rule. Okay, so when it comes to actually buying an Audi S4, there's something quite important to realise, and that is they're not all created equal. Now, unlike on the Audi RS model cars, where the specification tends to be at the highest spec all across the board, when it comes to the Audi S4, it can vary in specification an awful lot between the various different models. So what we'll do is we'll give you a quick overview of what some of the key optional extras are on the Audi S4 that you may not have realised, so that when you come to choose yours, you can make sure that it's got exactly what you want. So first of all, the Audi sat-nav system was entirely optional on the Audi B6. The earlier ones tended to have the RNS-D, which had quite a square screen. That was replaced by the RNS-E later on in the B6 and all throughout the B7. And that has kind of a slightly wider screen. But that's important to note is the sat-nav is an optional extra. And looking at the sound system, one of the most popular upgrades is the Bose speaker system. This is found in quite a lot of S4s, but certainly not all. When it comes to the seats, all S4s have the Recaro electric seats, and they are all rear folding, 60-40 split on the rears for both the saloon and the Avant models. But optional extras on the seats, you've got the heated front seats, you've also got a memory driver's seat, that's an optional extra as well. You also have the heated rear seats, that's a very rare option on the S4. Also on the rear seats you have the outer side airbag option as well, and again that's quite a rare option as well. There are also a selection of optional blinds. We had manual blinds for the rear door windows, and one of the rarer options is to have the electric rear sun blind for the saloon model. Parking sensors are also another option on the S4. Some only have rear, some have front, or of course some have both, but also some have none at all. So if that's an important factor, do bear that in mind. For the headlights, the options that were available were to have automatic headlights, which switch on when obviously it starts to get dark. In addition to that is to have daytime running lights and also follow me home lights. Those are all optional extras as well. For the wing mirrors, they came in aluminium finish as standard. On the B6 they're actually cast from solid aluminium. On the B7 they're a plastic which is sprayed in an aluminium type paint. You can't tell the difference to look at them. But one of the optional extras on the mirrors was to have an electric folding option. Cruise control was another optional extra that was not standard on the S4, and also there was an option for a multi-function steering wheel which was only available on the B7 S4. And with regards to interior colour choices, on the original Audi S4 you can have the seats either in what's called silver, which is essentially looks like a cream finish but technically is a really light grey, or of course the black. The Cabriolet also had a red seat option, as did the Avant and the Saloon on the B7 only, quite late in production. It is possible to get those with red seats as well, but again that's quite rare. For the interior trims, there were a few different options to choose from on the B6 it had like a steel mesh option, which was replaced on the B7 by kind of a brushed steel option. However, one of the most popular colours, of course, is the carbon fibre, which looks great in these. But you can actually find them, they're quite rare, but they do come up with kind of a wood effect and also a black piano effect as well. Another optional extra that you've probably not even thought about is the rear view mirror. Now, there was an option to have an electric auto dimming mirror, which is really, really useful when you're driving at night. Another really important factor to consider when you're looking at buying your S4 is, should you go for the manual or should you go for the Tiptronic automatic? Now, a lot of people watching will only really want to consider the manual version, and that's absolutely fine. However, for day-to-day driving, the Tiptronic box actually offers quite a few advantages over its manual counterpart. Now, on the S4, the automatic gearbox option is Tiptronic, and it actually has the flappy gear shifter paddles on the steering wheel, which makes it really, really nice to drive and easy to change up and down the gears. And also on the automatic gearbox you have the standard drive mode, but then you also have the sports mode, and that essentially makes the S4 two completely different cars. Comparing the automatic and the manual is kind of, it's always switched on, if you like. All of that power is always there, it's always hungry, it always wants to drive forward, it always wants to go. And you can have that same experience on the automatic gearbox in the sport mode, where it will constantly want you to manually change the gears using the Tiptronic paddles. However, there's also the standard drive mode, which is great for day-to-day driving when you want to kind of switch that power down a step and just kind of sit back and relax. If you've got a long journey, you're hopping in the car, you're driving to France, you're going to be on the road for 7 or 8 hours, whatever it might be, you don't necessarily want to be in a car that's always wanting your input and always wants to go. Sometimes it's nice just to sit back and enjoy driving that car. That power is always there. You know, if you drop a gear and put your foot down and drive, that car will take off. Absolutely no doubt about it. But sometimes it's kind of nice to have that slightly more relaxed drive, and that's something that the automatic can offer you, but obviously the manual unfortunately can't. And also there's that old argument of how long it actually takes to change your gear. You know, if to change your gear you have to press the clutch down, move the gear stick and then release that clutch whilst pressing the accelerator. Is that quicker than, you know, pressing a button on a steering wheel? Obviously the answer is no. You know, when was the last time that a manual gearbox was used on something like an F1 car or something of that nature? And when it comes to top performance cars, everything is Tiptronic these days. However, lots of people prefer the feel of the manual car. You know, they like to kind of get that experience of feeling those gears and getting that kind of movement, more of a driver intuitive feel, if you like. And that's absolutely fine. If that's the route that you want to take, that's no problem at all. But you definitely should also consider the Tiptronic model, because it does offer you the kind of the almost two cars in one option. So when you're looking to buy your Audi S4, is service history important on these cars? Yes, very much so, because as we've covered in this video already, we have this inherent issue with the cam chains on this particular car. It's essential to know that these cars are being looked after in the right way. So a full service history is absolutely essential on this particular car. You want to know, when you look through that service history of that car, that it's definitely been looked after by the right people for the entirety of its life. When it comes to looking at the service history of the S4 you're considering buying, if it's got a full Audi service history or Audi main dealer and Audi specialist, that should certainly be considered a major plus point. If your car's only been to Audi, or been to Audi and a good Audi specialist, you can pretty much ensure that they would have put in the correct oil for this car. However, if the car's kind of been all over the place to Bob's Corner Garage, whatever it might be, you can't necessarily guarantee that they've been putting the correct oil into this car, and so that may have had a negative effect on the cam chain system. So it's a really, really important thing to bear in mind. A lot of independent garages these days, they'll buy in oil in 100-litre drums, and they might have 2 or 3 different oils that they essentially put into all the cars that they service, which isn't necessarily the best option for cars, and certainly not for cars that are a little bit fussy, such as the Audi S4. So that service history should help you ensure that it's always had the correct oil, and that's a major plus. Does the number of owners affect the car? Not really. You know, you might have a car, especially at this age, that's had 5, 6, 7 owners. That shouldn't necessarily be considered a major negative, as long as they've been good owners that have looked after the car. And likewise, that goes back to the service history. If the service history checks out and you're happy with that, then you've clearly had a series of owners that have loved owning and have paid to have the car maintained properly. Next, we're going to have a quick talk about running costs for the Audi S4, and that's where these cars really do come into their own. If you've checked out our Audi RS6 buyer's guide, for example, if you've seen that, you know how expensive some of those cars can be. However, by contrast, on the Audi S4, the running costs are generally pretty good. Okay, so fuel economy is not great, but surely you already knew that. You're not going to be looking at buying a 4.2 litre V8 car if you're trying to get the maximum miles to the gallon. You'll be lucky to get high 20s on these on a long motorway journey, and you're typically going to be in the kind of 18 to 21 kind of miles to the gallon kind of range on a day-to-day basis. But on the flip side of that, the major advantage of the Audi S4, especially when compared to its RS counterparts, is that the parts are generally quite inexpensive and are certainly much more readily available than many of the RS parts. As a practical example, if you looked at, say, the Audi RS6 of a similar age to the B6 S4, so you'd be looking at the C5 model, the brake discs on the front are sided, and it's very, very hard to find non-genuine discs. You can get non-genuine pads, but discs are very, very hard. So the only real option on the RS6 is to go for completely genuine discs and pads. And you're looking at the best part of £1,000 to do all 4 corners. Whereas on the S4 there are plenty of non-genuine discs and pads to choose from. Loads of different companies like APEC and Brembo offer really good disc and pad setups for these, and also the genuine Audi discs and pads on these aren't that expensive at all. And that's because the calipers that are fitted to these cars are shared on several other models across the Audi and VW ranges, so they're a fairly common part. So as a general rule of thumb, the part prices on the Audi S4 aren't that bad at all, because many of the parts are shared on various different models across the Audi and VW ranges, as opposed to on the RS, where they tend to make quite a few of the higher top-end performance parts specifically only for the RS. So because this car shares many of its parts with many other models across the range, it really does help keep the prices down, because the parts are, for want of a better word, far more common and easily available. So what are the common problems you should be looking for when you're buying your Audi S4? Well, to be honest, I don't like using the term bulletproof, but they're fairly sturdy and fairly reliable. Obviously, you've got the cam chain problem that we've already covered in depth, and that is by far and away the biggest problem that you will find on these cars. Yes, you do get other problems on the S4. You do get the occasional gearbox issue. You do get the occasional kind of clutch issue on the manual cars, things of that nature. But just like you would on any model of car, really, there's no kind of particular weak point where you can say, well, that's guaranteed to fail. Yeah, it's just kind of general wear and tear, as you would expect from any car, with exception, as we said, for the cam chains. The things that we see the most often on the S4, which are broken or damaged, are almost entirely cosmetic rather than mechanical. You get things such as on the armrest lid, the catch is almost always broken. That's very, very common. And to buy a new leather lid from Audi, you're probably looking at the best part of £100, including taxes. So that might be a little bargaining point when you come to buy yours. Another common cosmetic weak point is on the glove box, the outermost, which is left for us here in the UK. The outermost hinge tends to snap. It's very, very common. Probably see that in about almost half of the S4s that we get come through. So that's another thing to bear in mind. So that could be a little haggling point for you. One other thing we do see very often on these is they'll very often have a faulty parking sensor. That can be either 1 or 2, and depending on where the parking sensor or sensors that have gone faulty are located out of the 4, that can actually switch off the whole of the circuit. So that's one thing to bear in mind if you put the car into drive or reverse and you've got the parking sensors switched on, but all you hear is one long beep, beep, and then nothing, and they don't seem to work. That would be because one of them in the chain in a certain position has either gone faulty, or you've got more than one of the 4 has gone faulty as well. So again, that's another little thing to bear in mind. Another thing we get asked a lot is, can you do a lot of tuning to the Audi S4? The simple answer to that question is not really. It's 4.2 V8, naturally aspirated obviously, so it does not have a turbo, so that somewhat limits the kind of power increases that you can expect to get from one of these cars. Now, if you do some research and you start looking at stage 1 remaps on these, you'll notice that you're probably only getting a 10 to 15 brake horsepower increase, as opposed to a stage 1 on like an RS6, which will give you 50 to 65 brake horsepower increase. So the gains are really quite nominal, especially for the costs involved. Another thing to bear in mind if you're looking at doing one of these engines is that they're kind of quite well tuned as they are, and what you don't want to be doing is putting additional strain onto those cam chains. So you're not really getting much more power by doing the remap, but it might, for example, change the gearing, something like that, to give it the effect of having a little bit more throttle, if you like. But again, that can have a negative effect, as really you want to try and keep that cam chain system as standard as it can. So for the amount of power that you're gaining, it's probably not worth doing a remap on one of these, certainly at a stage 1 remap at least. However, what you can do if you want to kind of tune one of these, for want of a better word, is a good option is to get a good exhaust system fitted. Something like Miltech make a really good system for both the B6 and the B7, and they come in resonated and non-resonated options as well, depending on how loud you want to go. But that kind of is going to give you a bit more of give you a very slight increase in brake horsepower, but nominal. But it is going to improve the sound. It's really going to allow that V8 engine to roar. So that's kind of one of the more kind of common upgrades for these, is rather than trying to remap them to try and get an extra 10-15 horsepower out of them, is to get a nice exhaust system fitted. So well worth having a look, especially at Miltech. So is it possible to get more than kind of 10, 15, 20 brake horsepower extra out of these engines? It is, yeah, but you're going to have to spend a lot of money looking at stage 2 and stage 3 remaps. I drove one of these a few years ago that had been worked on by Revo here in the UK. And they'd managed to get the car up to, I think it was 392, something like that. But that had thousands of pounds spent on it to kind of get that close to 50 extra brake horsepower out of it. So yes, it is possible, but you can be spending kind of the same value as the car just in the upgrades. So it's not really that practical. And like I said before, on these they are a little bit twitchy because of that inherent problem, and you really want to try and look after that cam chain system. Okay, so you're looking at buying an Audi S4 and you want to ensure that you get a good one. Now, how do you do that? Well, the first thing is not to focus too much on the price. What you don't want to do is just go out and buy the cheapest one that's on the market, because the cheaper ones don't always have the correct service history, and they haven't always been maintained in the correct way. In many ways, you're better off spending, let's say, £1,000 more up front to ensure you've got one with a really good service history, rather than £1,000 cheaper for a car that's got a questionable service history. So that's the key thing to bear in mind. Don't be too focused on price. You want to make sure you get a good car. As we mentioned earlier in the video, having that comprehensive service history goes a long way, because you can then ensure for your own peace of mind that the car's been properly looked after. Likewise, if you can find a proper Audi enthusiast that understands these cars, and especially the inherent quirk of the cam chain system as well, and they know and they appreciate that problem, and you're speaking with a like-minded person, that will go a long way as well. And most importantly of all is to use your ears and your eyes and a little bit of common sense. So when you first start the car, you may get that 1 to 2 seconds cam chain rattle that we've already discussed in this video. That shouldn't put you off too much. That is fairly normal. That will affect the majority of S4s that you may well view. However, what you want to listen out for is that permanent cam chain rattle, especially once the automatic clutch kicks out and the revs drop from the higher point after about 60 seconds down to its regular standard idle. It's quite easy to listen to the cam chain rattle, and the cam chain rattle really does stand out. You don't have to be a car expert to know the car's rattling. It will be very, very apparent. Now you may well find, if you start the car up and you've got the engine open, you're kind of looking around the engine bay, you've got kind of a tappety noise at the top end. That's absolutely normal on the Audi S4. When you close the bonnet, you shouldn't hear that. It's kind of a light tappety noise, and that shouldn't be confused with a cam chain rattle. There's a good little tip for you, which I'll show you, which is a good place to listen to cam chain rattle. So let's have a quick look at that now. Okay, so if you want to listen out for a permanent S4 cam chain rattle, what you should do is start the engine, wait about 60 seconds or so for that automatic clutch to kick off, so that the revs come back to its normal idle speed. And then a good place to listen is just down in the front wheel arch area. Remember that the cam chains are on the back of that engine, so you want to be listening towards the back of the engine. So that's an ideal place. If you put your ear down into there, you can kind of almost hear what the cam chains are doing. Like I said, if it does have a permanent cam chain rattle, it really isn't hard to spot. You will be able to spot it very easily. But that's a good place, is to get your ear down to the wheel arch, and if it's there, you will hear it. And of course, be sure to give the car a good test drive. If you're in a manual, make sure you test that clutch, make sure that the gears are changing smoothly, and likewise exactly the same in the automatic. Use your paddle shifts, make sure that the gears are shifting up and down exactly as they should. Everything should feel nice and smooth and together. So there we have it, guys. We're coming to the end of our Audi S4 buyer's guide. And we don't really think it's all doom, it's all gloom. It's not. The Audi S4 is a wonderful car to own. It's a wonderful car to drive. You should go online, you should check out all the original reviews from when this car first came out. And you should also check out the original episode of Top Gear from 2003, where they reviewed the Audi S4 B6 and they took it around the Top Gear test track. They absolutely loved it, as I'm sure you will as well. I'm a die-hard S4 fan myself. This is my own personal S4. I've owned this for approaching 5 years. I've never owned a car for that long before in my life. And prior to this, I've also owned a B6 S4 as well. So I'm definitely a die-hard fan. Yes, they do have the inherent quirk on the one side with the cam chain issue. But if you kind of set that aside, or set that kind of in its own context of, yes, at some point during the life of owning one of these cars, you may well have to spend £2,000 to £3,000 to have that cam chain work done properly. But once that's done, that will last you for years. And remember, you're not going to have to do cam belt changes, so you're going to be saving a little bit of money there as well. And of course, the parts on these are fairly cheap, especially compared to things like the Audi RS models. So there it is, guys. Like I said, I hope it's not all doom and gloom. These really are fantastic cars. I would personally absolutely recommend owning one of these, and I hope this has been really useful for you, and we'll catch you on the next video. Thanks for watching.